Aloha and welcome to the BDK Yoshiaki Fujitani Interfaith Program at Chaminade University of Honolulu. My name is Dr. Malia Dominica Wong, and I'm happy that you can join us for today's program of Where's My Religion? How does my faith support my life? We have a fine group of young panelists from the Buddhist, Catholic, and Jewish traditions who will be sharing their personal experiences on how their religion has informed their decisions in living. This program is made possible through the legacy of the late Reverend Bishop Yoshiaki Fujitani. His dream can be found in the program's mission statement. The BDK Yoshiaki Interfaith Program brings together the Buddhist community with all other religious communities in Hawaii to promote interfaith dialogue and provide opportunities for understanding and action for peace and justice in our community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce fellow board member Masago Asai, who will lead us in our opening reflection and tribute to the late Reverend Bishop Yoshiaki Fujitani. Thank you, Masago Asai.
In remembrance of the late Reverend Yoshiaki Fujitani, former bishop at Honpa Honganji Mission of Hawaii and our mentor in the interfaith community. He passed away on May 17th this year. He was one of the humblest people that I have known in my life. In admiration of his humbleness, I offer this invocation. Repentance. When was the last time I thanked my parents who gave me a life? Repentance. Have I ever appreciated that my heart has been beating with no intermissions since I was in my mother's womb? Repentance. Have I ever felt grateful for the fact that the sun and the moon rise and set every day without me working for it? Repentance. Have I ever been thankful to honeybees that constantly pollinate a wide variety of plants, of which we consume as vegetables and fruits each day? We human beings are no greater creatures than other earthlings, inhabitants of the earth, such as animals, plants, insects, and any sentient beings. Likewise, our human lives are equally precious. No one is superior to the other. Last but not least, land, ocean, wind, and sky are all alive and possess energy as well. My prayer for all of us, humankind, is to be humble, living as a member of this universe in a harmonious relationship within ourselves and among all other living things. Mahalo nui loa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to, Masago is one of the board members too of the BDK Fujitani Interfaith Program, so we're very honored to have her give our invocation. I would like now to introduce the moderator of your program, and that is Brittany Bogle. And so Brittany has been attending Chaminade University since 2019 and is a student of religious studies and psychology. Brittany served in the Navy for 5 years as a radar technician, where she was introduced to many different cultures and religions. Brittany and her active duty husband have an 18-month-old daughter who is the light of their lives. And so thank you very much, Brittany, for being with us, and I will turn over the show to Brittany.
Hello, everyone. It is so great to see all of your faces. I know we've been wearing masks for a while, so it's good to see you all here. Before we get started, I'm going to do just a few little housekeeping rules. So the chat box is open. We will be taking some questions from everybody that's watching. So feel free to go ahead and put those into the chat. We do have some questions that we've kind of created together already. So I will be keeping track of what's going on in the chat. And then, so another thing that I want to make sure that we're saying is that none of us here think that we are kind of the know-it-all whenever it comes to our religion, nor do we believe that we have 100% grasp on any other religion that we're talking about. This really is just an open communication with everybody that's here. And our audience, you're welcome to make comments in the chat as well. You're free to do that. So with all of that being said, we're all just going to listen, enjoy conversation between interfaiths, and I will start off with introductions first. So if we kind of just want to go down the line, that may be easier. So if Koki, if you want to start, we can kind of just go through that way. If you would like to tell us where you're from, your age, if you're comfortable, and then what religion you associate yourself with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brittany. So my name is Koki Atchison. I am a member of Honpa Honganji Hoigatsuin, and that's Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, the religion I associate with, and I'm 24 years old.
And Andrew?
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Anchetta. I am 22 years old. I just graduated from Chaminade University of Honolulu, and I'm currently working as an admissions counselor in the admissions office here at Chaminade, and I was born and raised a Roman Catholic.
And Dwight?
Hi everyone, my name is Dwight Matsuo. I'm 29 years old. I am more closely associated with the Buddhist Study Center, and I'm of the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist faith. And yeah, born and raised in Hawaii, and I'm very honored and glad to be here.
Devin?
Hi everyone, my name is Devin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm from the Bay Area, California, and I'm also calling in from the Bay Area, California. I was born and raised in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, and I'm still practicing in that tradition. And I'm also working in as a nonprofit in the juvenile justice system right now. So, it's a pleasure to be here.
And Alexander?
Hi, thank you. My name is Alexander Perez. I am 21 years old. I'm from Guam. And like Andrew, I was born and raised Roman Catholic.
And Ezra?
Hi, my name is Ezra Levinson. I am 16 years old, a junior at Punahou. I live in Kailua, and I'm Jewish.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And so now we're just going to go ahead and jump into questions. So one of the first ones we have is, how has the pandemic influenced how you practice your religion or just your beliefs in general? Koki?
Sure, I can start it off. So I think that the pandemic for me coincided with my graduating college. And also in the pandemic, I moved back to Hawaii, where I feel most at home. And I think that both of those like life experiences also kind of contributed to my becoming more involved, I would say, with the community here, the Sangha, than I was in Colorado. So even though that's where I was going to school, even though there was some, Buddhist temples, some Jodo Shinshu temples even, I wasn't quite as involved over there. And I think that, the opportunities to meet other people from that Jodo Shinshu tradition, but also in events like this on Zoom, of course, there's lots of opportunities to expand the scope of our religious practice in that community sense, especially. So I think that yeah, the pandemic has offered a lot to reflect on, and I find that reflection is a valuable part of practice as Jodoshin.
I agree with that. Is there anyone else that would like to answer this question? Ezra?
Yeah, I think the main effect that the pandemic has had on my experience of and practice of religion has been that before the pandemic, I was involved locally with Temple Emmanuel, my synagogue. It's on the Poly. And I was working in the Madrachimot program, the teacher's assistant program at our Sunday school, and I attended services sometimes. But the pandemic sort of both allowed and in a way necessitated like seeking out religious practice in different ways, like online when we weren't able to be in person. And that led to me finding other Jewish communities on the continent and in other places that had things about their practice and their traditions that was really appealing to me. And so even though I'm still happily involved with Temple Emmanuel, I also feel like the pandemic has opened up a sort of wider world for me of what's out there within Judaism and what really what I want to seek out as I get older and find other aspects of my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Ezra. And I saw, Andrew, your hand was up.
You know, I think for me, the pandemic was an interesting shift in the way that I was practicing and living my faith, because for Catholics, you know, the Mass is the most important prayer. It's the highest form of prayer in our tradition, and not being able to gather on Sunday in the physical building of the church was challenging, because for us that meant that we could not receive the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. You know, we could not be there physically to receive that. And so participating in Mass virtually was kind of a shift in the way that we were all practicing our faith. And for me, it kind of showed that I had to take more initiative to practice my faith, because I was stuck, you know, at home, and I had to seek out ways in which I could pray, ways which I could continue growing spiritually and in my faith journey. But I think for me, the pandemic has actually helped me to, like I mentioned, take more initiative in my own faith life. And it's kind of continued, even though we're in and out of the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, but we're also kind of out of it. So it's kind of pushed me to continue what I started and what I initiated, in that I take more ownership of my faith, and I actually, you know, sit down and read a little bit more about my faith, and, you know, I read more books, I listen to more podcasts, I watch more, you know, homilies by other priests. So in a way, the pandemic has actually helped me to grow more in my spiritual life, in ways that I didn't expect, ways that I didn't think that would happen. And overall, it has benefited me a lot, actually.
Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. Is there anyone else that would like to answer this question? Yeah, Alexander?
Just ringing off of what Andrew said, like, yeah, the shift to online has definitely introduced new methods of prayer, new things that you just never thought of before. I just like to say inversely, personally, because of the online Mass option, there are some days where I find it very hard to be like, okay, well, we gotta get up and go to Mass now, when I could just easily stay home and attend online. And yeah, so I appreciate the options, but it also has introduced a new challenge to me.
And Dwight?
I think for me, the pandemic really provided an opportunity to focus in on and practice certain aspects, I think, of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. Like, one very important concept or idea is the idea of impermanence. So understanding that things change in the world. The only constant is change, and that's what we believe. So switching from doing activities and like how everybody said, switching from in-person to online, presented for some events that I planned and stuff. It presented an opportunity to shift and explore new ways to keep young people engaged, to spread, our teachings, to connect others. And it created new opportunities for long distance connections, which has been pretty cool. Kind of similar to how the other panelists were talking about, reaching out and creating a farther, casting a farther net and finding, people around the country, around the world to connect with and to learn from. And it also presented, I think, the opportunity for learning more about how to be compassionate and how to empathize with others, because I think that the pandemic has kind of allowed people to express, their ideas, and it's become more evident, people's just the way people think, the way things that other people are comfortable with. So understanding, that we all come from different backgrounds, and that affects our perception on how things are, and that I think for the most part everybody comes from a good place and we just express it differently. But this was a true, I think, opportunity to practice that understanding, versus everybody just walking around, and smiling, showing, being kind. When you're put into a difficult situation, that's where the true test and the true opportunities happen. So, yep.
And I think what everyone's already kind of been discussing leads us perfectly into another question that we had. And that is, do you feel that social media has a place in religion? For you personally, do you think that social media has helped your religion? Has it maybe changed your thinking because you are seeing different views? Yeah, Devin?
Yeah, so again, I'm a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, and I think that social media has a big part to play in how we move forward as a community. And I think the BCA, or the Jodo Shinshu community on the mainland, has definitely seen how social media has played a big factor in revitalizing young adult and youth activity. For example, me and Koki helped start a group called the Young Buddhist Editorial, in which we heavily rely on social media in order to keep young people connected with the temples and with our community. I wouldn't say Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is as much of a propagation form of like religion as other religions are. We don't really set out to proselytize and convert folks. And so social media for us isn't really a way for us to get our message across out there. I feel as if it's a way for us to connect those who are in some ways already connected, but also to bring in folks who may have some sort of interest in it, and really bring them into that space. And so I do think that we have to, maybe the younger generations working with our elders, try and think of new creative ways in which social media can be a factor in how we communicate, how we connect, and how we, move forward into this new, transnational, globalized society that heavily relies on social media, and then also understanding, the bad implications that might come out. I know people have seen a lot of stuff with like Facebook and Twitter, and like a lot of the implications behind that. And so how can we ethically use social media as well, at least from a Jodo Shinshu perspective?
Great, thank you, Devin. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to that? All right, so kind of to go along with that, whenever we talk about converting or just where our religion is, something that leads into that is, how were you raised? What religion were you raised in? So for example, I grew up in a very small community in Missouri that was very fundamental Protestant. And obviously joining the Navy really opened my eyes to all of these different ideas just within Christianity itself. And also I learned about Buddhism and Taoism while I was in the military. So what has that journey kind of been like for you? Are you still in the same religion that you were raised into, that your community, that's predominant in your community, or what does that look like? Yeah, Alexander?
Um, yeah, like how I said in my introduction, born and raised Roman Catholic. On Guam, it's most of the people there practice Catholicism, and you'll sparsely see any other forms of religion. But yeah, so I've been born and raised that way, and I haven't had much influence other than social media like YouTube and people talking about their own religions. But yeah, born and raised, and yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, so I was born and raised Catholic. I'm Filipino, and I think most Filipinos, practice Catholicism. And for me, the way that I describe my faith journey thus far is it's been there's been ups and downs. From elementary to middle school, I was very much kind of a robotic Catholic, I like to say. So it was more of a routine for me. I went to Catholic school for elementary school, and I was taught to pray these prayers, do these things, and go to mass every Sunday, and you'll go straight to heaven. And so it became a routine for me. And then once I got to high school, I went to a Catholic high school here locally, Maryknoll. But at Maryknoll, it was a little bit bigger, so there were more faiths present within the student population. So some of my best friends were Buddhist, some of my best friends were of no religion at all. And this was in a Catholic school. And so I kind of was able to learn more and experience people from different cultures and religions during high school. And that piqued my interest, knowing that there were other people practicing other things. And they themselves were happy in their faith or happy in their tradition. And that's the most important thing for me is, you're happy and you feel good practicing your tradition. And then once I got to college, I actually, like I was mentioning, I took a little bit more ownership for the faith that I profess. And I sought out ways to learn more about my faith, ways to grow more in faith, and ways in which I could evaluate where I was probably lacking in my faith. Do I do certain things that are not good for my spiritual health? Or do I do certain things that, should I do more of certain things to increase my spiritual well-being? And I think for me, taking ownership and taking initiative of my faith has helped me to actually be stronger in faith. And there's a way in which I felt more connected to the God that I believe in because I was taking more ownership of my faith. So being a Roman Catholic for me in my entire life, there's definitely been its ups and downs, but it's definitely been a growing journey and a learning opportunity throughout the whole journey thus far.
Thank you so much for sharing, Andrew. Is there anyone else who would like to go for this question? Yeah, Dwight.
So I think like Alex and Andrew shared, I also grew up for the most part, Jodo Shinshu Buddhist. But my family had a very interesting dynamic in which my mom's side was Jodo Shinshu, and then my dad's side was Christian, or is Christian. So it was kind of always like at family events, it was always kind of like a tug of war between, okay, I go to Jodo Shinshu church on Sunday, but my aunties and uncles are teaching me a lot about the Christian faith and kind of showing me why Christianity is good. So I was exposed to both religions growing up, and I think that both are really good. And also a funny thing too is I had time to think about that. growing up until high school. And then in high school, my two best friends, one was a very devout, or is a very devout Christian, and the other is, prefers to not practice religion at all. So one of my fondest memories of high school is we would go to the Walmart, McDonald's, and Mililani Town Center, and we'd spend 4 to 5 hours there discussing, our viewpoints on certain things that are happening in school or happening in our lives, and discussing, our different religious views, or my friend's opinion or my friend's viewpoint, where he didn't think that he really needed religion and he had enough guidance in his life. So I was fortunate to kind of have like an open, somewhat interfaith dialogue all throughout my life. And then I think what that did for me was, it showed me the benefits of both religions, Christianity and Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And I think the philosophy behind Jodo Shinshu Buddhism just resonated with me a little bit more. So that's where I kind of decided, I would stick with my Jodo Shinshu faith. But now that I am being exposed to, different, even more religions other than Jodo Shinshu and Christianity, and getting insight into a lot of different values and traditions, I still strongly, associate with Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, but I'm starting to realize that you need to be open-minded and be open to, the gifts and teachings that all the religions have to offer. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Dwight. And that actually leads us right into another question, is that kind of has two parts. Is one, have you ever explored any other religion, whether that be that you've actually studied, looked into it more, or simply just maybe gone to synagogue whenever you're used to going to chapel? And to go along with that is, how do you see religions coexisting together? Can they? Is that beneficial for society, do you think, to listen to those open dialogues? Or I'm assuming, since we're all part of this panel, we don't necessarily believe that it's just black and white and you have to be closed off to everyone. But I'm just interested on kind of your guys' way of thinking with this. Yeah, Ezra.
Sort of. I like the way that question segues from like personal experience to the broader question of religions coexisting, because I really feel like my answer to the second part of the question comes from my experience with the first part. I was raised Jewish, both my parents are Jewish, but the Jewish community in Hawaii and in a lot of places is very small. And I grew up with classmates and friends who were, for the vast majority of them, Christian. And so I was sort of seeing and being directly involved in like the interaction between those religions by necessity, not even by choice. I remember I was often the one who would come in near the winter holidays and give a presentation to my class with my parents about Hanukkah, which is has sort of become the Jewish Christmas. But I feel like because of that experience, I sort of had to have an understanding of my religion existing in dialogue with and in relation to Christianity. And then I feel it's easy with that understanding to then say, oh, well, it also exists in dialogue with every religion, because we as people exist in dialogue with other people who hold different beliefs and have different traditions and backgrounds. And so I feel like because of that, I really think religion can be a positive and constructive force in the way we relate to each other and understand each other across religious, I don't even want to say lines, but from different religious backgrounds. as long as everyone involved in that interaction has an understanding of their religion as something they have and can use to relate to other people rather than something they're right about and other people are just wrong about.
Thank you for saying that was very well worded. It reminds me, my cousin works in elementary school. She teaches first grades. And one of the things she always says is when we're having a difficult time hearing what someone's saying, we just have to put on our listening ears. So I think that kind of is a much more adult way of saying exactly that. Koki, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, so totally resonate with that on the notes of listening to others. I was trying to reflect on what experiences I've had going to other services outside of Jodo Shinshu. There's been a couple. My grandmother on my dad's side is Catholic, or sometimes goes to Catholic Mass. I'll let her define that for herself. And then I have some Jewish friends from college who got pretty close with, but didn't ever go to their temple services. And I was wondering why I haven't done more, a few, school field trips, that kind of thing. And I think part of it is because of a kind of egotistical fear of not showing reverence in an appropriate way and not wanting to step into a sacred space and make a mistake, even if it's as little as like removing your shoes or bowing at a certain time, joining in for a part of a chant or hymn. But those little things, if you recognize, our Bombu nature in Jodo Shinshu tradition, our imperfect being, then it's, I think it would be easy.
Change from Bank of Hawaii to that.
Oh, go into.
No, they changed to that from Bank of Hawaii.
I'm not sure. I'll just keep going. But as far as from my perspective, I totally think that religions can coexist and need to coexist because of how we can build empathy and compassion for others based on understanding those really core belief systems and how much similarity there is between them.
Yeah, thank you, Koki. That was very well spoken as well. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this? Yeah, Devin?
Yeah, and I was reflecting as well on like my interactions with people of other faith traditions, and I was trying to think, I think growing up I went to maybe two of my friends' Christian services. One of them was, I don't think counted as a service, but it was more of like a play. But we did pray, and then I would always go to my family friends' Christian community activities. So I wouldn't really go to the services, but I would go to their activities because when I was living in Utah, the Japanese Christian community and the Japanese Jodo Shinshu community are really close, both physically and family-wise and relationally. So you would have folks from the Jodo Shinshu community helping out at the Christian fundraisers, and then folks from the Christian community helping out at the Jodo Shinshu fundraisers, and so I think that was really important for me to understand, how that works within the Japanese American community, especially. But I think maybe similar to Koki is that I've always felt maybe a little bit uncomfortable going into those spaces of different faith traditions. And maybe from my own perspective a little bit differently is because when I was in middle school, my friend and I were at the mall, and we were just walking around, and then this elderly woman comes and approaches us and sort of corners us into one of the corners at the mall and starts asking us like, are we Christian? Do we follow like Jesus? What religion we are? And so I feel like as a middle schooler, it was very traumatic for me to have this person I didn't know trap me by a wall and start trying to force Christianity upon me and my friend, and then making me read Bible scriptures and say, now Jesus in you. And so I think because of that, I've always had a hesitancy of going into these different spaces, and even having this sort of inclination or desire to go into those spaces. So I've always felt more safe in these Jodo Shinshu spaces or in Buddhist spaces, as opposed to being like, oh, maybe I'll go branch out. But I have also been fortunate enough to go to iftar dinners of those of the Muslim tradition. So I'm very fortunate to have been in those spaces as well. And then care dinners. So not very the stereotypical going to a mosque, but going to community events where people are in community with each other as opposed to being in, I guess, the same religious space as each other. So I think those are maybe my differences in that experience.
Thank you for that, Devin. And you're going to lead us into another question. But first, I saw Andrew's hand up, so I'll let him speak.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think the question of whether or not one faith trumps all or whether one tradition trumps all is always an interesting question to hear folks' perspective on. And for me, I love going to different traditions, services or, spiritual practices, whatever it might be, purely from the perspective of education. I am comfortable with my faith and my faith identity and where I stand in my faith. And I have no intention of trying to convert others. And I have no intention of wanting to change my own faith when I go to different, services or prayer or spiritual gatherings, whatever it might be. I go purely from the context of wanting to learn more about whatever tradition it might be, simply because I think as a species, as humanity, I think it's interesting that we all, regardless of what faith we identify as, we all look to something beyond ourselves, something greater than, than our human nature. And that's interesting to me. So, which is why I like to learn about what other traditions and what other faiths practice and what they believe in terms of higher power or things that are of beyond humanity. I just find that so fascinating. And specifically to answer the piece about whether or not, other traditions or religions in general can coexist. As a Catholic, there are so many different types of people who practice Catholicism. I like to describe it as there are those who are more on the Pharisee side. So those who are familiar with that term Pharisee, when Christ came to earth, Pharisees were the ones who were very strict and stern, sticking to the tradition of the teachings and the law. And Jesus himself was different in that he wasn't like that. And he came to earth to be with the marginalized and to sit at the table with the tax collectors and the sinners. So for me, who are we as humans to judge other people and how they live their lives? That's not what I believe my role on earth is. As a Catholic, I believe it's God's role to judge humanity, but it's not my role to judge other people based on what they choose to believe in. And obviously, that's me saying that statement. I'm sure there are lots of opinions about that statement, but that's why for me as a Catholic, I don't believe my role is to argue that my religion is the only religion that should be in existence. I think my role as a Catholic is to live as how Jesus did, in that we are to be inclusive and we're to be with those who are imperfect because we ourselves are imperfect. I always say that Catholicism is not perfect because it's taught by and interpreted by humans. Humans are not perfect, and so there's going to be room for error. And there's just within this space alone, the fact that we're talking about our faiths in a interfaith space is, somewhat controversial for even some people in my own religion. Some people don't even agree that this should be something that Catholics participate in. But I myself believe that this is an important space to participate in.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing with that. So we're going to everything's kind of flowing just naturally. I have a list and we're just kind of going to what works best. But to go back with what Devin is saying, it means that we're going to go to a little bit of a harder level for a second, and we can brighten it up a bit. But I think that there's no way to talk about religion without talking about the negative experiences that we have, because I think that's important to discuss, because I think regardless of your religion, you have had some sort of pressure or a negative situation that you have felt with that. So the next question is going to be, what is an aspect of religion that you have struggled with? Or even if you want to personally just say something that you have experienced. I can actually start off with this. So since I come from a very fundamentally Protestant hometown, with that being said, it was also only white. I grew up with 2 African American kids throughout my entire school, and that's from middle school all the way to high school. And I was actually just talking with a friend today who's of the Hmong community that if it even came to an Asian population, I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know other cultures that were involved with that. That wasn't something that was ever spoken about. I guess in my mind growing up, to be Asian just was automatically linked with to be Chinese. And that didn't come from a place of I was being racist. I just had no idea. I just wasn't open. I just didn't know, which made me think of, I really turned away from my faith for a long time because I didn't understand how there could be all of these different people and countries, but yet only one way was the right way, or that things could be so almost closed-minded in a sense. And I think where I turned with that through the pandemic, and honestly by attending a church here in Hawaii, is that you see so many different cultures and your worldview really expands, and therefore your idea of what your religion is expands. And I think where everything finally clicked for me was actually through the wonderful social media of TikTok, where someone was speaking about Christianity and they made this talk about how, well, Jesus wasn't white. And in my, I think somewhere in my brain, I was like, well, yeah, obviously, but literally had never thought about it in my entire life. Like, obviously that makes sense. But growing up, everything was white. Pictures of Jesus were white. So are there things that maybe a negative experience is kind of like morphed where you are and kind of expanded that worldview? Or maybe even there's just some things that you still have challenges with on the aspects of religion? I know that's kind of a big thing, so feel free to process that. Alexander, I see your hand raised.
I was, as soon as you thought of, or I'm sorry, as soon as you asked if there's any aspect that of our religion that we struggle with, I nothing came up to mind, like besides the church thing, but like I feel like the most serious aspect is the assumptions that come with it. Like, just because I say I'm a Catholic doesn't mean I know the Latin Mass. And I also feel bad for some people because, like, if I have a guy friend who knows I'm a Catholic, and he likes guys too, he might feel like I would judge him just for that. But it's inverse. Like, I don't really care. Just because he does something bad doesn't mean I haven't done something bad, you know? But yeah, I'd say the assumptions is what makes religion difficult, because there's good things and there's bad things with it, like Andrew said, ups and downs. But yeah, sometimes the downs can be very hard to get up out of.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Devin.
I think for me, the thing I've always struggled with is the institution of religion itself. And so, more so, in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, there's this concept of no doubt. No doubt, when one has no doubt of entrustment in the Buddha's teachings, then the one arises, or one I guess realizes the path to enlightenment, and one realizes the path to be born into the Pure Land for Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. And so this concept of no doubt, I've always sort of struggled with, because I've always thought, am I doubting the teachers who teach the teachings? Am I doubting the teachings themselves? Why can't I question these teachings? And so when the institution itself, maybe the institution of religion maybe is more harmful than, or perpetuates harm in different ways that, I wouldn't have interpreted the teachings of, is that me questioning the teachings, or is it me questioning the institution that is interpreting these teachings in a way? And so and I think that's for any religion, not just Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And so when we're talking about back to the question of can dialogue exist between different religions, I really hope that we can. But I think dialogue must also sort of what you were saying, Brittany, in your realization of coming to terms with whiteness in religion is. We have to come to terms with how institutions have played a role in displacing people, in harming other people, in contributing to genocide of people as well, and colonization and things like that. And so, and I think even this, and I don't know if this was definitely on accident. I don't want to assume anything bad, but this panel itself is made up of mostly men itself. So I think that as we talk about institutions and how our cultures and how human nature, I think like Andrew and Koki talked a lot about human nature being imperfect. We have to work our ways into being the better versions of ourselves to make sure that these dialogues can happen from an authentic place, and that we are acknowledging places of harm, acknowledging how we have contributed to oppression of other community groups, when we are having these dialogues of interfaith, building relations with different communities.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Devin. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in on this? Okay. Oh, yeah, Ezra.
I should preface this by emphasizing once again, as we did at the beginning of the panel, that this is me sharing my experience, not like the Jewish experience, because much of what I'm going to say is definitely not something that many other Jewish people would agree with. It's something that many would. But when I think about my experience with my religion over time, one thing that always comes to mind is when I was attending Sunday school at Temple Emmanuel, where I now work on Sundays as a teacher's assistant. I have a very vivid memory of the 4th, 5th grade classroom at the time, which had on the wall a map of Israel, by which I mean not the historical land of Israel, but the modern state of Israel. And the map was not representative of the disputed borders within and on the edges of Israel. It wasn't representative of the presence of Palestinian people. And there were boxes, the boxes that we used for tzedakah, which is sometimes translated to charity. We were asked to bring in money. We would donate the money locally, but the boxes we were collecting them in had similar maps of Israel. They belonged to the Jewish National Fund, which is an organization that's been played a major role in the development of the modern state of Israel. And I have struggled with my relationship with Israel as a Jewish person, because many people in the Jewish faith believe in Israel as the Jewish homeland, and believe that there's an inherent connection between Jewish people and Israel. But maybe even more than that, I've just struggled with the fact that that map on the wall was untrue. And so that's something that I feel like has actually, maybe ironically, become really core to my practice of Judaism and my understanding of religion and of myself, is that a really important part of religion and an important way to make sure, for me to make sure that I'm on the path I want to be on and playing the role I want to play in the world, is to constantly be looking at the information I receive anywhere, but especially from within my religion, and looking at the traditions that I follow and the prayers that I'm saying, and to be saying, is this true? Is this something I agree with? And if it's not, how can I reconcile that? And even better than reconciling it, how can I change it and find a practice and an understanding and a worldview that I'm comfortable in and that I feel is not harming people, and ideally is helping people and being a positive force in the world.
That was great. Thank you, Ezra. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this part? Yeah, Andrew.
I think for me, I have struggled with those Catholics who identify themselves as elitists. I have come across Catholics who believe that because they are Catholic, they are elite and that they are better than the rest. And for some reason, their understanding of the theology of Catholicism has led them to believe that they are the elite, and for me, I struggle with that idea because that in itself, that idea of thinking that we as Catholics are elite is hypocrisy, because that when Christ came to earth to be amongst the humans, Christ identified himself with the sinners and the tax collectors and the marginalized. And if we as Catholics disassociate ourselves from those types of people, then we're being hypocrites. I've met and I have experienced Catholics who refuse to give money to the poor, and to me, you don't have to give money to the poor, but I have known Catholics who shun the poor. And I'm like, how can you identify as a Catholic, but yet you shun the poor when we are supposed to be living and following the example of Christ, who himself sat and ate with the poor? And so my experience with those Catholics who identify themselves as elitists and better than the rest has kind of pushed me to be more passionate about the faith that I profess and keeping others accountable for what they say they believe in, and ensuring that other people, their actions and their words and their intentions all align. I'm not saying that I know how to practice Catholicism better than any other person, and I'm not saying that I'm a perfect Catholic, but I'm just saying that I take it upon myself to keep other people accountable. I'd hope other people would do the same for me, as I'm living the Catholic faith.
It's great. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing that. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Yeah, Koki.
Everyone has a lot to say on this topic, I guess, or wants to chime in. But yeah, something that struck me hearing from the other panelists is the idea of religion being used to guide us through our very real and political realities of life. And I think that's been one of the most challenging things about Jodo Shinshu for me, is how, in what ways can it advise us on navigating those more challenging political situations. And I was talking with my friend a couple of days ago about this topic, a high school classmate of mine at Pacific Buddhist Academy. And his interpretation was that if, true followers of Buddhism if they're far along on their path, would be able to kind of transcend that daily political reality and be kind of, closer to enlightenment and able to reject the secular world. But that just is not my reality. And I don't, from like a political standpoint, I don't think there's a way to not be political. Like even being apolitical or not getting involved in politics is a political stance. So that's something that I still continue to struggle with, is that interpretation of the teachings of the Dharma in political life. I'm saying politics a lot, but yeah, and I think it's challenging when the teachings of the Buddha, or what other religion you may follow, you want to use those teachings as applied in those other situations, but it can be challenging when it seems like the recommendation is to take a higher road or just not get involved as much as you might want to. So figuring out how to be involved appropriately as guided by religion is a challenge for me.
Yeah, that's, it's great that you said politically, because that is actually where we're heading with this next one. And then I promise it'll get a little bit lighter. So as someone who is 30 years old, one thing that I can say about the generation coming up is I am so proud of how compassionately bold they are in speaking their views and kind of making the world see different areas of life that maybe other people haven't necessarily experienced. And I think that that kind of goes back to social media. You know, whenever I went to college my first time around straight out of high school, Facebook wasn't really a thing yet. It wasn't something that was used a whole lot. And so I think social media has allowed things, hard subjects to be talked about. And obviously there's a negative side of social media, but I think that just the idea of things being known and voices and stories being heard is a very good thing. So I know one of the questions that actually came from Sister Malia's class was, do you believe that religion has a place in government? And if so, or if not, just kind of what does that look like? And you could speak to if maybe your religion has a certain stance on that in itself, how they believe your faith base plays a role in politics, or even if you just want to speak to you personally on that. Yeah, Alexander.
Well, you sent this question in an email, and I was saying I wouldn't want politicians or anyone hiding a part of themselves in order to get to a certain position. I'd also not like somebody trying to use a religion as a cover or like a reason to get votes. Like, oh, vote for me because I'm a Catholic. Oh, vote for me because I'm Buddhist. But in terms of like ethical guides and moral guides, like, yeah, bring your religion in, because I don't know, most religions they're all about being good for other people. So yeah, I'd like somebody to carry that guide with them, especially if they're in a position like a governor or a senator. But yeah, not to be abused, but to be used properly.
Thank you, Alexander. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Yeah, Dwight.
So originally I was gonna say, like, you know, I'm totally like separation of church and state, you know. But Alex, you brought up a good point. I think that for our leaders in government and in politics, using the religion to guide them towards the righteous and what they think will benefit humanity, I think would be a great thing. But like you said, to be used properly and not abused. So I don't think that it should be one religion, you know, should be forced upon, you know, everybody else, or, you know, should be overly emphasized, but maybe just recognizing that, you know, people's values can come from religion, you know, their moral compass can be guided by religion, and that can guide their decisions in, you know, the laws they pass and things like that. But still creating that openness and not, you know, making people feel like their government is influencing them to prioritize or to be of a certain religion. That's the question.
Thank you, Dwight. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this one? Yeah, Devin.
I had a hard time. I know you sent this email out earlier, and I had a hard time, you know, digesting it. Because I do believe there should be some sort of separation. And then there was another question that you put in there, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but you also said something along the lines of "In God We Trust," or that was one of the questions. And so I think this question sort of assumes that every religion in the United States is sort of on this equal footing, this equal ground, and that they are treated equally under the law or as an institution by other institutions. And I think that that's simply not the case from my experience. And so, for example, when I was younger, we would always have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and I always felt uncomfortable reciting it. I don't think I ever recited it because of the one line. Under God, one nation under God, and then I don't recite it now for other reasons. But then also on all of our money, we also have "In God We Trust," and so from my experience, I feel like the certain religions are touted out and prioritized, and then we see it a lot in legislation that's put out. If you live in certain areas have highly dominant religions that are very influential in getting laws passed.
You muted yourself, Devin.
So I think someone else muted me, but
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Getting laws passed was the last that I heard.
Yeah, I think there's certain religions within the United States who have very influential positions of power within the U.S. And that, you know, if religion isn't within oneself or isn't within, you know, politics, it can't be separated, right? It's hard to separate the person from the political, as like a lot of queer Black feminists and queer liberation studies talk about, like the person is political. So it would be very difficult to separate religion from politics and religion from the person, but at the same time, I think we also have to come in with that understanding that not every religion in the United States is treated the same, and is not on equal footing, even though we try to be as equal as possible. And so I think I would hope that it would be separate, but I can understand how it can't be separate at the same time.
Thank you for sharing that, Devin. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this topic? Yeah, Ezra.
I'll try to be brief so we can move to the next question, but when I think about religion as it relates to then action in the world, it really has made me realize, even just within Judaism, that religious texts specifically, and like religious beliefs are often pretty much like a Rorschach test. Like two different people can look at the same words on the page and draw the completely different conclusions, and often that's because they want to find different meanings in the text. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it means that religion isn't viable as on its own a justification for political action, for a law, or really for anything. I think where its value comes from is in the way it helps us articulate our own ethics and morals, and also the way it represents a culture and a history that has valuable lessons. I think it's important that it be understood as a tool rather than a justification, because doing something because it is what is called for by a religion is often an excuse, but people don't do things just because, like, oh, I read in my religious text that we're supposed to do this. They do it because of that, and because it fits with their personal beliefs and their morals, and really in the end because it's something they want to do and they believe is right. And so I think it's important to understand religion as a part of our actions rather than as a justification for them or as the only reason for them.
That's great, Ezra. Thank you so much. I think that everyone's kind of spoken on this side. Is there anyone that would like to add more in this question? All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward, and these questions are coming from Sister Malia's class. So at this time, if there's anyone in the audience that would also like to ask any questions, please feel free just to enter that into the chat, and I'll be watching for that. So hopefully from this point, we can get a little lighter on that side. I know those last few questions were kind of deep. So one question that was brought up is, how does religion influence your way of life? And I feel like we've talked about that a lot today, which is kind of everything. But if there's maybe even just some practices or daily kind of rituals that you have, if you want to just speak to that, please feel free to. Yeah, Koki.
I have one example that I can cite my source on that really fundamentally changed my way of thinking about people. It's from a book called Buddha in Your Backpack that I read in high school. I think it was a gift maybe from my dad. And the concept that really stuck out to me was the idea that everyone as they are is a result of the causes and conditions that brought them to this point. And I think that has made it a lot easier for me to be empathetic, even though, it's challenging at times. I do get frustrated, of course. But to recognize that anybody is acting in a certain situation because of their own experiences, their history, who knows what else is going on in somebody's life, I've been able to recognize that and take things less personally.
That's great, Kogi. Thank you. Yeah, Alexander.
From my perspective, with the Catholic background, faith is a relationship. It's a journey, and lately on my journey, I've been coming to be more thankful, and that's because everything I do, which I typically take for granted, has recently it's been more and more clear that everything that I take for granted is a gift, and like ever since I've been seeing things that way, it's made me more thankful, made me stop more often and say, oh, thanks God, like, wow, you really have my back on that one. So I'd say in that aspect, that's how religion influences my daily life.
Thank you, Alexander. Is there anyone else that would like to respond to this one? Yeah, Dwight.
Well, for me, one way, so I think the three, I want to say like biggest concepts that I resonate with in Buddhism, or the biggest teachings are compassion, interdependence, and mindfulness. So starting off with mindfulness, it's every day I at least meditate in the morning, so that I can clear my mind and become more present, and aware of myself and surroundings around me, and also throughout the day, it kind of, that practice of being present allows me to focus in on whatever I'm doing, who I'm talking to, and what's happening at work, or and then that also helps to that also brings in like a meta consciousness of like, okay, what am I thinking about? So when I'm talking to other people, being compassionate and being understanding of others, when somebody says something or does something, I can kind of like the meditation practice lets me step back and kind of tell myself, wait, they probably didn't say that, as a personal attack to you. It might come from some sort of defense mechanism or an experience that they had in their life. And it allows me to kind of sort through difficult situations with a calm demeanor and a more sensible frame of mind, I guess. And then interdependence just reminds me, kind of like to the point of Alex said, we are kind of we didn't become who we are just by ourselves. There's a lot of gifts that we've received from others, from the world, from the community, from our parents, kind of like Miss Masago's speech, at the beginning of this session, recognizing that, there are a lot of things that we can be grateful for, and then taking it a step further and giving back. So it's helped me to become more involved in community activities, being more involved at church, and doing my best to give back. Yep.
Thank you, Dwight. Is there anyone else who would like to answer this question? All right. So the next thing that we're going to go to, and I feel like we have talked to this in quite a few ways, but the question is, what do you do if your religious leader says one thing, but you believe another? Yeah, Ezra.
For me, I think my personal understanding and practice of religion has sort of evolved over time to become less about a religious leader or even like a specific religious belief and more about sort of the body of leaders and beliefs and history and culture that makes up Judaism as a whole. And so because of that, I feel like it would be easier for me to navigate a situation where a religious leader in my community said something I disagreed with, but I still think it would be hard because even with that understanding of like religion as personal interpretation, it would still be essentially someone in a position of power saying something that conflicts with my own view of things or my own view of the world. And I feel like I have come across situations like that. And in practice, really, they've strengthened my religion because I've had to sort of grapple with the discrepancy between what I think and what they've said, and what I really believe becomes clearer and also more deeply held as a result of that. And I do feel like that's really core to Judaism as a religion in many ways. Also, there's a text called the Talmud, which is essentially a historical text of commentary on the Torah, which is sort of the core religious text in Judaism. And that's really been an inspiration to me that in addition to this sort of one immutable thing that Jews have been reading for the entire time they've existed, there's also, we also read commentary where people are saying, I disagree with this part, or I interpret this part in one of any number of ways. And I think that's really core to my understanding of my religion, that disagreements strengthen it rather than weakening it.
All right, great. So we have another few that came in the chat. So the one that I see right now is, if given the opportunity to visit in a new religious experience, what do you feel are important virtues or values to observe and consider? Such as, oh, I'm going to say this wrong, SANGHA, community or other means of socializing. And I can repeat that question if you need me to. Yeah, Andrew.
So I just wanted to go back to the previous question really quick. I think for me, in my opinion, there are a lot of Catholics who blindly follow their shepherd, meaning that they just listen to whatever their parish priest says or whatever their local bishop says, and they blindly follow them just because of the position that they hold within the institution of the church itself. And for me, I believe that's a bad way of practicing the Catholic faith. That's a bad way of practicing religion, because you're just blindly following whatever the human that you're listening to might say. Because the Catholic Church does have a teaching authority. There's the magisterium, which is the teaching authority of the church. But every parish priest or every parish pastor still has room for interpretation of whatever they might think themselves. And it's no secret that there have been bad priests, there have been bad bishops who have done bad things, and people blindly follow them. And that's, in my opinion, that's not good at all. More so, they should be using their insight to guide their own faith journey and their own faith life, because there's still room for error in everything that we practice, because we're humans and there's still space for mistakes to occur. So I think it's important that people who practice a religion or a faith use their own mind and their own consciousness to also interpret whatever they're learning or whatever they're being taught, because I think that's important as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I'm going to combine the question from Brian and also one from Paul as our final question. We've got about 5 more minutes of the Q&A side. So one is if you're given the opportunity to visit in a new religious experience, what do you feel would be important to you? And then another that's obviously not in correlation to, but if you still want to answer from Paul is, are you concerned by the decline of active members in your religion? And maybe even what are your hopes for your religion? I feel like those things are kind of a good kind of just closure. So for me personally, what I would really enjoy doing is if I could start from just not knowing anything about Christianity. I think it'd be a very unique experience to do it outside of the United States or even a predominantly Christian society, because I think that it's easy in some ways for me to say, yes, I identify as Protestant, but that's also what I've known the majority of my life. So I think it'd be interesting in going to a different place, a different culture and society, in attempting to practice that same religion and learning about it in new eyes. Yeah, Alexander?
Well, for Brian's question, if you have the opportunity to visit a new religious experience, I think one thing to keep in mind is don't have an expectation of what's going to happen. Just be present and try to take in as much as you can. And also just simple things like, how am I supposed to dress? Am I supposed to participate to this degree, or am I not supposed to participate in this degree? And with Paul's question regarding a decline, especially in the younger age groups, maybe it could be that like the people that represent these religions are the Pharisees, like what Andrew said, or the elitists, the people who put themselves on a high horse. And so since they make themselves appear that way, they make what they represent less appealing and less desirable to learn about.
That's great insight, Alexander. Thank you. And Devin, I think I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think addressing, Brian's question of if I were to encounter a new religion or start exploring other religions, I think what I would want to keep in mind myself is how important or personable religion is for different communities. And so understanding that each community has a different experience, even if they're practicing the same religion. So for example, like an indigenous Catholic might be experiencing Catholicism different than a white Catholic. And so understanding the history behind those two different things and then interacting with that in a culturally responsive way. Is my presence there uncomfortable? Is my feeling of uncomfortability, what is that? Where is that uncomfortability coming from? Is it because maybe this is not a space built out for myself? Should I explore other places? And so I think that sort of cultural responsiveness and understanding the importance of religion for different communities would be something I would definitely look into if I began exploring other sort of religions out of my own curiosity.
Thank you, Devin. Yeah, Kogi.
I saw another question come in, but I just wanted to briefly comment on mostly Paul's first question of, are you concerned by the decline in the active members that go to Buddhist temples? So this, specifically Buddhist, but would be interested to hear from other faith backgrounds as well. But this question comes up a lot, I think, especially to younger folks in our temple. And I've thought about it a lot and have at times been concerned. But why am I concerned? I think more so because I so appreciate the experience that I've had by being part of Jodo Shinshu tradition. And I hope that others, too, can carry on that tradition if they, choose to follow it. But I have to intentionally redirect myself away from a scarcity mindset, when it comes to our communities. Like just looking at everybody who showed up here, it's not just Buddhists, of course, but from so many different faith backgrounds. Our communities already have so much abundance. Our sanghas are wealthy beyond monetary value. So I strongly believe that that will continue, even if it is changed in form for years to come.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're at the end of our time for the Q&A side. So I just want to say thank you, one, for helping me move this along. I was a little nervous when I saw how many people were going to be in attendance today. So I just want to say thank you so much. You guys all did such an amazing job. And I will hand it back over to Sister Malia.
Mahalo, Brittany, and all of you, very fine panelists. And for everyone that's been in attendance, there are some more questions in the chat, which maybe will still stay open if you want to address in the chat. And if you have any ideas for future sessions that you would like to see in our BDK program, please also include that in the chat. So I'd like to turn the program now over to Alice Tucker for some final observations and then our closing.
Thank you, Sister Malia. We've gathered, albeit electronically, but we have gathered. And we have listened to these leaders of the future who have shown their splendid potential. Their amazing, huge leadership capabilities. And we have learned different viewpoints that we had not considered in the same way that some of our guest speakers have presented them. We quietly agreed with some of the views expressed and some of the approaches presented, but we must think about some of the concepts presented today as we had not considered that viewpoint before its presentation to us. These young and relatively young people have clearly given us not just food for thought, but an enormous banquet of thoughts for contemplation. We are deeply indebted to our panel. Thank you so very much. I wish you could see us all clapping for you. You have been splendid presenters. Thank you very much. We're not able to meet with each other after the program and have good conversations about the presentations of our speakers. Therefore, it's the duty of each of us to go forth and report to our friends and to our communities about this outstanding program series. The Chaminade BDK Reverend Yoshiaki Fujitani Interfaith Series presents 2 programs a year for the general public and for our many religious communities. And we hope you'll attend future events in this series and that you'll tell as many people as you can to join us. Because the format may be, this format may be the new normal for the future, we must adapt and adjust, and we must become the people with a message, and we must help spread that message. We thank you most heartily for joining us today, and we wish you a beautiful end of the year and a blessed new year. Thank you so much for being here.
One.
Aloha.
Everyone.
Okay. Aloha.